Jennifer Jones is founder and president of Media Street Productions, an award-winning media company. A long-time Rotary member. How long, Jennifer? 96 she joined. So, yeah, 30 years round. She served RI as Vice President, Director and District Governor, and we know her best here as the RI President in the Melbourne Convention year 2022-23. Jennifer will now step into the role of Chair of the Trustees of a Rotary Foundation. She's led major initiatives including Rotary's rebranding and the End Polio Now campaign. Jennifer is a recipient of Rotary's Service Above Self Award and holds a Doctor of Laws degree. Past President, Governor Amanda Vence, sends her apology as she is interstate today and offered the following introduction. So feel free to squirm if you want during the introduction, Jennifer. It's my absolute pleasure, this is Amanda speaking, to introduce a woman who is not only a remarkable leader, but a truly unforgettable presence in Rotary. Past Rotary International President Jennifer Jones is a proud member of the Rotary Club of Windsor, Roseland, Ontario. A special Aussie welcome as well to past District Governor Nick. We're delighted to have you at Rotary Melbourne and not Royal Melbourne. Admirable restraint for such an avid golfer, never mind. What strikes you first about Jennifer is her warmth. Anyone who spent even a moment with her knows exactly what I mean. That ability to make every person feel seen, valued and included is a rare gift. Jennifer's place in Rotary history is extraordinary. In 2022-23, she became Rotary International's first female president, which frankly, given how long Rotary International's been going, is pretty extraordinary, but well done for breaking down that glass ceiling. She showed us what leadership looks like when it is bold, inclusive, modern, joyful, and deeply human. Her presidential theme, Imagine Rotary, gave us permission to dream bigger about who we are, who we welcome, and what Rotary can become. And she backed her vision with action through the Imagine Impact Tour and a presidential year that brought Rotary's story to the world, including the unforgettable 2023 convention, the first one in person after COVID, so beautifully shaped by a call to imagine what's next. Please join me in warmest welcome to our friend, past Rotary International President, Jennifer Jones.
Thank you, Philip, for a lovely introduction, and I will message Amanda shortly to give her the gratitude for warmest welcomes as well. It is an absolute joy to be able to be here in the biggest, the best, I understand, club in Australia. Would I be correct in perhaps saying it that way? Okay, I know we have people online and we've got a lot of visitors, so I've offended someone along the way at that statement. However, your history certainly stands before us all, and it really is a reflection of the incredible history and the depth of what you've been able to accomplish as a Rotary Club over so many years. There are so many people in the room who are dear friends, and you've all been introduced, but one of the things that I love about Rotary is that we can say certain names, and it's just kind of like share. You don't need a last name. I can say Dennis, I can say Murray, I can say Peter, and people understand automatically who they are. We had the great privilege of hosting what I consider to be the best Rotary convention ever here in your beautiful, beautiful city. And I must say that under the leadership, the host organizing committee, Mary Berry, where are you in the room right here? Give it up for Mary. Her and Emma and so many of the team members, again, people whose names you don't need the last names, you just know who they are because they stand up and they do the work. There are so many reflections of what that conference, that convention meant to Nick and I. And driving back down the streets as we were arriving here at the hotel today, I couldn't help but feel just such a sense of belonging and warmth about being back in this community, in this city. Congratulations, Manon, on your induction today. A privilege to be able to see you join our Rotary family. And Trevor, for you to be recognized with your Paul Harris, an absolute privilege to be able to place the pin on you, as I did for Jim yesterday when we read donations in kind. Today, we began the meeting and Ruth had a beautiful reflection where she talked about peace. And that's what I want to lean into today, is talking with you about peace. Our world is in a very tumultuous state at this point in time. And I think it gives us pause to reflect upon what Rotary means in the context, in the fabric of peace. How many of you have ever done a media interview? Okay, so about half of the room. For those of you who haven't, what you might not know, or what, I think we might presume, is that in advance of doing a media interview, you often think about what are they going to ask and how might I respond? And so I was going through this exercise many years ago, prepping for an interview about the role of service in civil society. And I was sitting and I was brainstorming with my younger brother, David, and out of his mouth came these words: in order to live in the kind of society that you want, you have to help build it. I want to say that again. In order to live in the kind of society you want, you have to help build it. And I looked at him and I said, Dave, who said that? And he said, I said that. And I said, no, but who really said that? And he said, I said that. And we went back and forth and it became a little bit of a comedy routine, but they were truly authentic words that came out of his mouth that day. Words that I believe absolutely reflect the core of who we are as an organization. They reflect it so much so that our vision statement, I believe, aligns directly with it. Together, we see a world where people unite and take action to create lasting change across the globe in our communities, and perhaps most importantly, in ourselves. When we do the work, particularly the hands-on work of our organization, we are creating the kind of society that we want. And in turn, we become better individuals. So, how does our Rotary Foundation support peace? Well, certainly we know that peace is one of our core essences, but I truly do believe that all of our areas of focus support peace. I believe it's the arch over everything that we do. When mothers and children are treated well and are able to live and thrive and survive, they have an opportunity for peace. When a young person doesn't deal with diarrheal illness because of bad water, they have an opportunity to be educated and again, create peace. This club was one of several across Australia and New Zealand who played a leadership role, not only a leadership role, but you created Give Every Child a Future. What an incredibly audacious and beautiful goal to immunize more than 100,000 children across the South Pacific nations for rotavirus, HPV, and pneumococcal disease. I want to acknowledge that some of the leaders are in the room today. Trevor, who we recognized earlier, Chris, James Allen and his wife are here from Sydney, and Rob from your club. Big dreams. When we dream big dreams, we can make a big difference. We went to Kiribati. I brought along members from Global Citizen. We had camera crews. We wanted to capture the story. And James and his wife, they were there as well. And I will tell you, as we were flying into Kiribati and I was looking out of the window of the airplane, I was looking down at what I would have considered to be probably one of the most spectacular honeymoon locations I could have selected. A beautiful atoll. The water was absolutely spectacular. And we landed. we got onto a little minibus with our little team. And we began a journey, a very short journey to our hotel. And as we were driving along this highway, I was watching as people were swimming in the water, swimming away. It wasn't until later on that I realized they weren't swimming, they were doing their daily business. In that circular atoll, the water in the center part where people were swimming and doing their daily business became so infected that disease and mortality was out of control in this area. So going there and being able to meet with families and to be able to witness the partnership with UNICEF and our other partners to be able to bring these vaccines to children, what a difference. What a difference to be able to think of something so large and bring that to life. I sat with a mother and a father on the floor, holding their little child. He was probably about 3 years old. And mom was telling me that he received the rotavirus, the vaccine, but then he did acquire rotavirus, but they knew well enough, they were educated to get him medical care, and he was able to survive. There had been an outbreak about 3 or 4 months before we arrived. When she started to tell me about her neighbors, and we're sitting literally in a very small floor, looking through walls, seeing the neighbors through trees. I'm talking about a very rudimentary kind of environment. She started to tell me that they started to hear stories on social media of their neighbors and their children who hadn't been immunized. And she started to see the obituaries of not 1, not 5, not 10, dozens and dozens of children, because they didn't have the same opportunity. So my friends, the fact that you had the audacious goal to do something on such a grand level, not only has saved lives, but it's created a more peace-filled environment in that nation. I congratulate you so much, and I hope that the next audacious goal is being talked about right now. My friends, today I am reminded that peace is not an abstract ideal. It's a daily act of courage. Peace begins in the quiet choices that we make. For us to listen before we speak, to understand before we judge, to build bridges where perhaps others build walls. Rotary has always believed that ordinary people like us, who sometimes are extraordinary, can work together with intention and can transform our world. And we do. Every clean water project, every scholarship, every vaccination, every act of service is a declaration that peace is indeed possible. Here in Melbourne, you are part of a global tapestry of more than 1.4 million beautiful members with hearts that choose compassion over indifference. So let us continue to lead with empathy, to serve with humility, and to imagine a world where peace is just not the absence of conflict, but the presence of opportunity, dignity, and love. That is, of course, the Rotary way. I had the chance to serve as club president in the year 2001, taking us back just over 25 years. On a fateful Tuesday, we meet at lunch. I was watching the television set as I watched one of the planes hit the Twin Towers in New York City. I know all of us remember very well and very vividly that day. I had lived in Manhattan for a year and a half and felt a very close connection, and still do, to that city. That tower I had been up many, many times just by myself to go and watch the sunset. I was in horror watching it. And then seeing that second plane hit the second tower, in that split second, realizing This was not an accident. It was an act of war. I didn't quite frankly know what to do about my Rotary Club that meeting. I kind of figured we might have canceled it. Now, if you think back at that point, social media wasn't even around. And so as I started to reach out to members, I said, we have to meet today. We live in Windsor, Ontario, on the border with Detroit, Michigan. We have a very close relationship, and our district is actually international with clubs on both sides of our border. And so I said, yes, we must come together on that day. We must be together in shared humanity. And I don't think a single member actually missed that meeting. We had a program, but I kind of just sort of put it to the side. And as we started our meeting, we stood with the American flag and we turned towards it and we sang the US Star-Spangled Banner with great gusto, with tears streaming down our faces, in unity with our neighbors, understanding that something was happening beyond their control. That day, we had a speaker who was going out as an ambassadorial scholar. So instead of the program that he had prepared, we talked about peace. We talked about the importance of peace and what we as individuals can do to make that better. Now, I share that story with you today because here we are, 25 years plus later, in a time of great tumult, once again, with great uncertainty around a lot of things in our world. But there is hope. Earlier this month, Canadian Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, Mark Carney, was here in Australia speaking with your Parliament about the rising importance of middle powers, nations that may not dominate the headlines, but shape the world through cooperation, credibility, and commitment to shared values. When I heard that, I immediately thought of Rotary. Rotary has always been a middle power in the truest and best sense of the word. We don't rely on size or force or noise. We rely on trust, on partnerships, on the belief that when people of goodwill work together across borders, across politics, across cultures, that we can shift the direction of entire communities and sometimes, yes, sometimes, the world itself. Australia understands the importance of middle powers, and so does Canada. And Rotary has been proving it for more than a century, whether it's ending polio, advancing peace, or strengthening local communities. Our impact comes from collaboration, not domination, from service, not status. So as Australia and Canadians, we reflect on our role in a changing world. Rotary stands as a living example of what middle power leadership looks like. Steady, principled, relentlessly focused on building a better future. Building a better future, as I conclude, is something that I had an opportunity to witness for the second or third time yesterday at Donations in Kind. What an incredible example of what has been harnessed in a community to provide hope and dignity and, yes, peace to people in many parts of our developing world. Watching a container that Jim was overseeing to be filled to go to Cambodia was watching a Jenga puzzle being put together. It was absolutely brilliant. But I want to leave you with a challenge, perhaps a call to action, and I know we then have perhaps a couple of minutes for some questions. Pauline, who is in charge of the Donations in Kind at this moment, along with many other volunteers, but is the lead organizer, she took me to the back of the warehouse at the end, and she said, I have to show you something that happened that's quite incredulous. She took me back to show me a huge rack, a substantive rack, probably the size of this entire wall, floor to ceiling, filled with, trying to think of the name of what, material, but there's a name for it. Yeah, fabric, but anyway, rolls and rolls and rolls of fabric. There's a sewing name for it, and I'm not thinking of it. Anyway, $2 million of fabric that was slated to go into a landfill. And of course, most of the other items, the over 1 million to 2 million that are in the warehouse at any given moment, if they weren't brought there, they'd be going into landfills too. And so the work, Manon, that you spoke about earlier is so critically important. She showed me these materials, $2 million worth of material that was going to go into a landfill. And she said, yes, bring it here and we'll find something to do with it. Now, I said to her, this is fascinating because I'm actually submitting a grant today for women in Uganda who are working on a sewing project where we're providing sewing machines and material to make reusable sanitary napkin pads for women in this refugee camp where they live. 200,000 women in this settlement, actually, is what it's called. And so I said, do you think we could get some of the material to Uganda? And she said, I think we can. And I said, do you think we can get some of the material to other countries? I think we can. So my big call to action to you today, Rotary Club of Melbourne and friends, put your thinking caps on. Let's see if there's something that we might jointly, I'm willing to participate, that we might jointly think about that could help to move this forward into the world to create something that can make things even better. When I was visiting this settlement 3 years ago, I sat with women who had escaped from several different nations surrounding the settlement. Each one of them, when they escaped from their war-torn countries, and it was about 10 or 12 of them that I talked to, each one of them left their countries on foot with their children, 2 or 3 or 4. Every one of them told me that their husbands had been murdered. Some of them arrived with fewer children than they had left with. When I asked them what they wanted, they didn't ask for money. They asked for opportunity. They wanted something that they could do to create product, to be able to sell it, to make money to put their children through school and to feed their families. I can think of no better way to honor the journey that all of these women have taken than find a way to get these materials somewhere in the world where we can make an even larger difference. So, as I said, my friends, I ask you to think about the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal that might be in front of us. Let's think. I hope one of you is sitting in your chair thinking, I think I could play a role in this. Something hands-on that we can get ourselves into to get something to someone to make their lives better. So, Philip, I think you're going to tell me later on if anyone steps forward to want to join in on this. But in the meantime, I do thank you for your incredibly kind attention. And I know that we have just a few minutes left, literally just a few minutes left for a couple of questions. And I will say in advance of the first question, I will truly answer anything, personal or otherwise.
Thank you, Jennifer. I know that this is the donate section. Mark Carney proved by his earlier on important speech that you've got to stand up for the right and protect your values, despite being the minority and despite repercussion. Rotary being an international organization and one that's particularly one that's headquartered in the US. What role does Rotary plays a big role in community peace? But is there a role for Rotary as a global peace builder at political level? And is there any lobby that Rotary can do at an international level to promote peace globally?
Let me just quickly sort of repeat an abbreviated version of what was just mentioned. The reference to Prime Minister Mark Carney's speech at Davos and then the leap to Rotary, and whether or not there is a role for us in a political sense to advocate, or is there a role for us to play, particularly as we are headquartered in the United States. So I will say, and we are not a political organization, but many of our activities are political to a certain extent. And I think, we often say that Rotary is not political, but if I were to ask you if you had politics in your Rotary Club, you'd probably all chuckle and say, oh, there might be a little bit here and there. It's the same at the international level. One of the things I will say is that we have multiple international offices across the globe. And so while we are headquartered out of Chicago or Evanston, Illinois, we rely heavily on our international offices as well. And to the extent that when we're doing new hires now, we look to filling positions internationally as opposed to completely looking at them being housed at our international headquarters. And so diversifying out our base has been a fundamental step that we have taken. It is applied to many different things, one of which is highly political in some parts of the world. The term diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. We've taken a stance where in parts of the world where that is political ammunition to try to soften some of the language we use, but yet in other parts of the world where it is firmly embraced, continuing to encourage members to use what is right for them. So while we have to walk a political fine line because of our US tax-based status, we do want to make sure that we are honoring our members and what they believe in across the globe. Thank you. I hope that answers your question.
All right. Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah, that's good. So just before you go off, Jennifer, I have a small gift. I'll let you have a joy of opening it, but in advance of that, I can let Jennifer know that it's one of our red jerseys we made for the Rotary Convention, representing Rotary Club of Melbourne. So there we are. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.